Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the May 18th meeting of the Birmingham Business Alliance's Government Affairs Committee. We're excited to be back in touch with everyone. We hope this message and this day finds everybody safe and well here in our community. We know these are unprecedented times, but as we just said, amongst a few of us, our work continues, and quite frankly, the government affairs work in this community might be more important and more relevant now than any time in our lifetimes. At this time, I do want to turn it over to the president of the BBA, Fred Mccown.
Thank you, Kelvin. First, let me just thank you for your leadership, serving as the head of the Government Affairs Committee for 2020. It is turning out to be a different year, and will continue to be so for several months, I would think. I also like to thank Elizabeth Paul of our office here, who has managed the process of setting up this webinar, and we are in for a real treat today with Secretary Canfield. I want to welcome everybody, add my welcome to Kelvin's. Appreciate everybody being on the call. So I want to add a special welcome to our BBA investors. Couple of items on the structure of the meeting. If you have questions for Secretary Canfield following this briefing, if you'll use the chat function at the bottom to send in your questions, we would appreciate that. Second, this meeting is going to be recorded and will be available on the BBA's website after we finish. Among our investors, and one that's long-standing and for this organization is Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and I want to thank Blue Cross, Ted Haas, Clay Lofton for their sponsorship of Government Affairs program, and is particularly the presenting sponsor of this webinar. Ted is going to have the honor of introducing our speaker, but just a little bit about Ted. I think most people in Birmingham very familiar with Ted. He has served as the Vice President of Government Affairs for Blue Cross and Blue Shield since July of 2019. Before that, Ted chaired the Governmental and Regulatory Affairs Practice Group at Maynard, Cooper & Gale, which is where I got to know him. He's a graduate of Brown University and received his law degree from Fordham University. He has been a leader throughout the legal community in our state for many, many years, serving and leading many committees in the Bar Association and otherwise. So, Ted, thank you for being with us. Thank you for your service to our state. Thank you for your sponsorship, and I will turn it over to you, Ted Haas.
Well, thank you very much, Fred, and good afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is Ted Haas, and I'm Vice President of Government Relations for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Alabama. And on behalf of our President and CEO, Tim Vines, and all 3,400 Blue Cross employees, we are very pleased to be able to sponsor today's discussion with Secretary Canfield. The current health crisis has obviously led to an unprecedented economic crisis. And during this time, those Blue Cross employees have been working hard to bring peace of mind to the more than 3 million people who have given us the honor of meeting their health insurance needs. The Blue Cross team is working with our customers to ease their health and economic burdens by extending payment periods, waiving co-pays on all COVID-19 tests and treatments, and radically expanding access to telemedicine by opening it up to every single physician and physician extender in our unparalleled network of providers. We have also moved to advance payments to our providers, and particularly to our smaller rural hospitals, to ensure that they have adequate cash flow during this difficult time. Like everyone on this call, we want to get to the other side of this crisis so that we can start healing our economy, which of course is what Secretary Canfield has been working on. By every measure, Greg Canfield has been an unqualified success as Alabama's Secretary of Commerce since he moved to the executive branch in 2011, following 5 years in the legislature. He has modernized the department and expanded its mission to oversee our state's award-winning workforce development activities. During his time as secretary, Alabama has repeatedly been honored for economic development excellence by multiple trade publications, and he has assisted in bringing projects totaling more than $37 billion in private sector capital to the state to create more than 120,000 high-quality jobs. As our state moves into recovery mode, we are all very fortunate to know that Secretary Canfield is on the job. And with that, Mr. Secretary, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ted. And I also want to be sure to thank the members of the BBA Government Affairs Committee. It's actually been a while since I've been before this committee, and never before have I been before this committee brought to you by Zoom. So while Zoom is one of those technical advancements that we've all gotten used to during COVID-19, some of us before that, but certainly during COVID-19, it's great to have an opportunity to once again visit with you. Fred, you've got a good group assembled here. I'm going to try to keep this interesting as much as possible, and certainly afterwards we'll be happy to entertain any questions as long as time permits. So, you know, I was trying to think about how to make the remarks with all of you today. It's really interesting because it wasn't too terribly long ago. In fact, it was in January of this year that I gave a overview to the Economic Development Association of Alabama. This is the organization that represents all of the professional economic developers throughout our state. And at their annual meeting, I gave a report and basically was touting, welcome to 2020. Our economy is in a sweet spot. At that point in time, we had 2.2 million people that had entered the workforce and were employed. It's a record level of employment. At that time, we had unemployment that had dropped to a historical low of 2.7%. It dropped to that level in December of 2019, and it stayed that way and that low through February of 2020. So as we looked at the dawning of the new 2020 year, we were feeling pretty good. Things were going well in our direction, and even into the first few days of March of this year, we were having discussions with our automotive OEMs across the state about their plans for expansion. A lot of our discussion was, what do we do about this tight labor force? The fact was that we were so employed in terms of the number of Alabamians in the workforce that we were beginning to find it difficult to find much needed employees for some of the advanced manufacturing, technically skilled jobs that are being created in that economy. We were talking to Airbus about their soon to be open A220 final assembly line in Mobile. We were definitely in an expansion mode, and it's interesting to see. Ted was kind enough to point out the team that we have at Commerce and the work that we've done attracting new investment and job creation across the state. And so, March 9th, that was the date that the governor convened the first meeting of the coronavirus task force. On March 9th, we concluded that meeting recognizing the fact that we had issues that we were going to have to address. We didn't know a whole lot about other than what was being reported in the news about what had been happening, particularly in China, but also in Italy and other parts of Europe at that time. That was on March 9th. Well, since March 9th, our world has changed quite a bit economically. When we look at what's been happening since that time, the Alabama Department of Labor, which has charge of working with unemployed Alabamians and trying to connect them to jobs, but also providing a much needed safety net for unemployment benefits. Alabama Department of Labor saw over $500 million, over $500 million in unemployment checks that have been written to Alabamians just since March 9th. That reached a high of 106,739 claims in the week of April 4th. Fortunately, we have been trending down. And so after the week ending May 9th, we've seen that taper down to 26,666 claims. So maybe we're turning the corner. We're not real sure yet at this point. We're being cautiously optimistic. Our unemployment rate, which I mentioned to you, had fallen to 2.7% in February, for the month of March, it ticked up to 3.5% in March. Nationally, that same rate was 4.4%. So it can arguably be said that the Alabama economy had not felt the effect as much as the remainder of the U.S. But we have not yet seen what April's unemployment rate was for the state and for the nation. But we do know that it's going to continue to. It will show some degradation. The economy itself in Alabama, we think, has, because of some of the work that has been done over the last few years, we believe that we've been setting up and creating a foundation that once we begin to come out of the COVID-19 depressed economy, we will begin to come out of it, we believe, quicker than some states. This will be a lot different, we think, than the Great Recession that occurred in the 2008-2009 time period. During that time, if you recall, Alabama was one of the last to go into that and really begin to feel those effects. But Alabama was also one of the last states to come back out of the effects of that recession. We think this particular case, because we still have investment that is significant investment in capital and construction and new equipment that will be rekindled and reactivated as the economy begins to warm back up. We think that Alabama is going to be in a better position to make the turn and begin to see improvement. We've surveyed the business community. I don't know if you know about the organization called Alabama Works or the Alabama Workforce Council, but the Alabama Workforce Council is established by the Office of the Governor. It is primarily a private sector facing organization that is charged with making recommendations for policy and programming to the governor and to the Department of Commerce and the education community. So we did a survey recently, and in fact, the survey was in April. And Alabama Works and the Alabama Workforce Council, in that survey, they surveyed almost 1,800 businesses, which is a pretty significant number. And of course, I don't think to anyone's surprise, you can characterize the results of that survey by saying that It revealed that Alabama businesses are indeed struggling with laying off employees. They're struggling from a lack of market demand. They're seeing disruptions in their supply chain, and they're having fears of being forced to shutter their doors permanently. The survey, again, which was just under 1,800 businesses, captured survey responses, 68% of which the responses were coming from businesses with fewer than 25 employees. So it captured a lot of small business sentiment, particularly in the smaller size businesses, as well as some larger size companies. Not surprisingly, 82% expect the pandemic to have a negative financial impact on their business. A third of the respondents have laid off employees as a result of COVID-19, and 53% had implemented a hiring freeze at that point in time. One important finding, we think, for Alabama Works and the Workforce Council, again, they're charged with developing education and workforce skills development and connectivity to that lies between education, workforce skills training, and career opportunities. And we think that one of the important findings from this was that going forward, 53% of those businesses that responded expressed a need for more employer-delivered skills-based training to help during the recovery. So as a result of that, and actually the reason we did this particular survey was we have already had for a couple of months underway a strategy building process where we are looking at displaced workers, working in partnership with the Alabama Department of Labor, the community college system, our Department of Education, and a number of our universities around the state. We're working to reconnect and provide opportunities for upskilling displaced workers, to give them the opportunity to reconnect upward in the career change, in the career chain, and hopefully have an opportunity to springboard their careers at a higher level as a result of this. That upward movement was going to be rather difficult when we were at fuller employment at that point in time. One of the other findings that I'll share with you, and I don't want to spend too much time giving you a bunch of numbers, but 53.4% of businesses reported their business climate was bad, but alternatively, almost 50%, 49.6%, expected the business climate to improve in the next 6 months. So I think Alabama businesses still understanding that we're going to see short-term effects in our economy are expecting to see improvement over time, which is a little bit more consistent with our view as well. As we look at how COVID-19 has impacted the work that we do at the Alabama Department of Commerce, it's had some significant impact. We have seen our project activity on certain projects slow down. We probably are working actively forward moving projects, those projects that still have forward momentum, at the rate of about 60 to 65% of pre-COVID-19. We have not yet seen a project that has been terminated as a result of COVID-19. So the remainder, that's other 35% of the project activity pre-COVID-19, we are seeing enter a period of hibernation, so to speak, that will get hopefully pick back up as the economy begins to warm again and the marketplace begins to return to normal and consumer confidence hopefully begins to rise. Someone said the other day that in Alabama, much of our economy would be better if we had more people buying cars and more butts in airplanes. I suspect there's a good bit of truth in that. Also effects from the state of Alabama and the Alabama Department of Commerce as a result of COVID-19 has been that we have really had to limit our activity as it relates to international trade development. One of the charges and one of our focuses to help drive job creation in the state is to work with Alabama's small and medium-sized enterprises to help develop international markets for them. And so we typically are engaged with 2, sometimes 3 international trade missions where we are leading a small group of these SMEs from Alabama into those international markets. And we're providing, through the assistance of the state, U.S. Department of Commerce and others, the trade organizations, we're connecting them to businesses and potential customers in those international markets. We've actually had to postpone at least 2 so far of those international trade missions. And I'm hopeful that we're, by the second half of the year, perhaps going to be able to rekindle that process where we can indeed help develop international trade opportunities. We are continuing to see new projects though. So our project managers have been busy in this COVID-19 environment and are receiving new project activity. So that's another positive sign that Alabama remains a target of favorability for companies that are looking to make investments whose investments are grounded on the future and not just in the present moment where we're feeling the COVID-19 effect. So we're hopeful that that is a good sign as well, that Alabama does remain very favorable in the marketplace for new capital investment and also the new job growth that comes with it. One other activity of the Alabama Department of Commerce that has been impacted has been our Alabama Film Office. Film activity is pretty well shut down. Across the U.S., there are some states that may be beginning the process of allowing, again, film activity to begin to take place. That's not the case in Alabama, but I think that we certainly are going to continue to evaluate that. All in all, COVID-19 has been pretty much for the Alabama Department of Commerce much the same in terms of its effect as we've seen in the private sector. And that is that about a 30% slowdown in business. And so, unless you're an airline and you have seen a 90% slowdown in business, I guess in COVID-19, a 30% reduction in business activity is, relatively speaking, not as bad. But it is time to get people back to work as safely as possible. It's time to give individuals an opportunity to return to the work of their careers and the financial support of their families, because somehow we've got to have the economy that can fuel the safety net that families need to be able to do everything from buy food to continue to live in their homes. And at the same time, we've got to do this in a manner in which we are maintaining the health and safety of employees and the general public as we move through time. And that's something that Governor Ivey's really been wrestling with over this time. She appointed a small group of us, an executive committee of the COVID-19 or coronavirus task force that she created. And our charge was to evaluate and make recommendations about a process to begin to return Alabamians to work and to normal life and to open up our economy as safely as possible. So I know she's been struggling a lot with how you strike that balance between keeping people safe, but also giving them the opportunity to continue to work in their careers and have the livelihood to be able to support themselves and their families. So hopefully we've made the right choices and made the right decisions, but I think time will tell. Speaking of COVID-19 and some of the response activity to that, I know that some of you may have seen the fact that the governor also created 2 working groups during this process. And we were really, really active in the first, I would say, 6 weeks of this process. We continue to be active in a trailing fashion at this point, at least in terms of the work that I'm engaged in. And she set up 2 working groups. One of those was a procurement group. This procurement group was focused on how we could obtain in a competitive environment, state against state, unfortunately, to get hold of PPE, masks, face shields, surgical gowns, ventilators, you name it. And so I had a small part in that group, but there was another group of people that she had appointed that were really working. And it was really difficult. It's been really difficult to wade through the number of suppliers and distributors of medical equipment and PPE that kind of rose up in this process and in this pandemic. Many of which, and you probably saw stories about this in national news, many of which were really just shell operations with no connections to medical supplies at all. Fortunately, the vetting process that the governor set up with this procurement committee did a great job of keeping Alabama focused on developing procurement channels from reputable locations and distributors. And so it's been overall, while it's been a challenge to obtain the PPE that was needed, particularly in the all important, as you have come to know them now, you've all come to know the medical world of supplies and PPE more so than you ever dreamed of before COVID-19. But the all important N95 mask is something that we've been able, still in short supply, but we were able to source, and those as well as surgical masks. The second committee, the second working group that the governor set up was, she liked to refer to it as BAMA. This was the Business and Manufacturers Alliance. And she asked me to chair this group. And many of you on this call today, I need to thank, because we had a couple of meetings like this. They were mostly conference calls where we were charged with, by the governor, the task of identifying manufacturers across the state that either were producing and manufacturing PPE or much needed medical equipment, or they were companies that, with a few minor modifications and a desire to do so, could go into the operation of manufacturing PPE and medical supplies. It's been a very interesting process. It's been very gratifying to see Alabama companies step forward, some of which are doing this only in the interim time to help meet the medical needs, particularly for the medical community, our first responders, and provide much needed equipment and supplies. But at the same time, we're also beginning to grow a industry around the state of Alabama. We make great things in our state, so why not make great medical supplies and PPE? And I'll give you some ideas on some of the kinds of companies that we've been working with during this time. But we've helped 2 glove manufacturers across the state go into and expand their operation to be able to provide disposable gloves for the medical community in response to COVID-19. And that's been an interesting process. One of those companies we had actually been working with at Commerce over the last 2 years to get them up and operational. And so it's been good to see that happen. We've been working with some med tech companies along the way that are startup potentials. They're even prior, they're not really early stage, they're really in potential formulation and forming as a company. So one of them is looking at providing, and they have the design for a new transport system. It's a set of vials that are built into one unit for saliva testing for antibodies, which once COVID-19 antibody testing becomes more reliable, you may see a shift from blood testing to potentially saliva testing, which would make it easier to self-administer potentially, so, and much more affordable. So, we've got a company that we're working with that's doing that. We've got a company that, two companies we've been working with in the state, one of which, a company called Home Tex in Coleman, has been known for producing and manufacturing bed linens, sheets, pillowcases, and a number of other items such as that have gone into the mask making business. They've got two lines of masks. One is a cloth mask that's reusable and has a high degree of filtration, so it performs really well to protect you against the COVID-19 virus. And they're also developing the process, and they are investing, and we're helping them with this investment to enter into the medical disposable mask business, where having that company in the state of Alabama producing PPE could be important as we hear the discussion that is taking place nationally about resourcing and reshoring these operations into the U.S. so that we're much less dependent on other nations whenever we have emergencies like this. We're working with companies that are producing new approaches to ventilator systems with new technologies. And all in all, we started off with about 45 companies, and we've narrowed that down to probably less than 8 companies that are very strong and likely candidates to go into the production of either PPE or medical equipment on a more permanent basis. But we're continuing to develop those opportunities as we move forward in time. One of the other things I think that everybody has on their mind during COVID-19 is, and not only when can I go see the hairdresser and go have my manicure and pedicures taken care of, it's also been what's happening with the legislature. And the legislature is in session for what could be the last day before they sine die today. Much of the success that we've had in the state since 2015, when we adopted a set of tools that were groundbreaking for the state of Alabama, that created a more sustainable approach to incentivizing project activity, that were more pay-as-you-go, meaning companies have to perform in order to reap the benefit of an incentive, which means that revenues flow not only to the state, but revenues also flow to locally to cities and counties, and you get the benefit of that positive revenue flow before you ever have to pay those companies any form of incentive. That was created by a legislative act in 2015, and it's called the Alabama Jobs Act. We had a following incentive tool that we passed in 2016 called the Growing Alabama Credit. Both of those have been some of the most effective and competitive tools that our state has ever seen, and it's borne out in our results to be able to compete with other states. It doesn't put us in a position where we're having to overcompensate with the use of incentives. It puts us in a position where we can compete for investment, and by pairing that incentive and creating it in a way that it is tied to the performance of the company, it provides more of an incentive for those companies to come here, grow here, and continue to reinvest here and create more jobs over time. Legislatively, the reason I'm bringing that up is that this group that I'm talking to today knows probably better than any other group. Those two bills, those two incentive tools rather, the Alabama Jobs Act and the Growing Alabama Credit, are set to sunset this year. So one of them sunsets on September 30th and the other sunsets on December 30th of this year. And we've been so successful with them that the caps, the limit that both of these tools were capped at has been almost reached. We actually reached the cap on the Growing Alabama Credit last year. And on the Alabama Jobs Act, we're approaching that cap, which if we don't raise that cap will put us in a position of not being able to compete for new investment and jobs, pretty much at a time where we're really going to need it as we come out of the effect of COVID-19. So we had hoped to be able to pass that bill, which we have not filed yet, just so you know, but pass a bill that would address both the Alabama Jobs Act and the Growing Alabama Credit, and address both the sunset of those bills and extend the sunset by another 4 years, and also raise the cap in those two tools, and hoped to do that in the regular session this year. And then along came COVID-19. So the governor has said that, and she's had conversations with the legislative leadership and has made the point that at a time in the future, we will likely see another special session. Part of that special session will be focused on economic development and the passage of this bill, probably along with another bill that we have been very supportive of, and that is a R&D credit, which research and development is a very important activity in the Birmingham region, as well as 2 or 3 other regions around our state. And so we've got a bill that has been developed by the private sector and their activity to drive what is important to attract more research and development in our state from the private sector. This bill is fashioned after a bill that's been highly successful in the state of Virginia. And so we're very supportive of that bill and hope to see it perhaps come into the special session environment when our Alabama Jobs Act and Growing Alabama Credit bill is taken up as well. So the legislature also is taking up the SB 161 executive amendment that was issued by Governor Ivey. And they are going into session. I think Ted pointed out at 1 p.m. today. The expectation is that we will see passage or concurrence from both houses with the executive amendment, but you never count on that until the votes are counted. But I think that the executive amendment offered by the governor is one that sort of helps bridge that gap that took place. It was a fairly large schism that occurred about the CARE Act funds and how the decisions were going to be made and who was going to be making the decisions about how those funds would be used in a COVID-19 economic environment. And they have to be used by the end of this year. So I think the governor's executive amendment has done a great job of identifying and giving the roadmap that both the House and the Senate and the governor can be comfortable with to safeguard how those funds are allocated so that they are used for COVID-19 related expenditures. And I'm not going to go through the list, but it's, in her executive amendment, she provided a roadmap that everyone can look at. It's very transparent. And I think that ultimately that transparency in and of itself will give the legislature the ability to get behind the executive amendment and accept it. And if that happens today, if that executive amendment goes in place, we then have the platform and the foundation of a plan that should allow us to put those funds to use as they were designed to be used before the end of the year. So that's a good thing. The other thing that took place in this regular session, and I think the governor will sign it, she may sign it today, is the Psca bond issue. The Psca bond issue, I believe, is $1.25 billion. This is a bond issue that would go to benefit not only public schools at the pre-K through 12 level, but also the community college system and higher education. This is all about reimbursement or providing capital for capital improvements. This is not for operating. This is all about capital improvements, and that's what this particular bond issue is always tied to. That Psca bond issue could be very, very important for Birmingham. Could be very, very important for UAB because we all know about the UAB Genomic Medicine Center. This is something that if it becomes a reality, could be transformational, not only for UAB, not only for Birmingham and the region around Birmingham, but also for our state. I think everyone understands the importance of the UAB Genomic Medicine Center and what that has in terms of benefits that it can offer, not only to the delivery of medicine in more meaningful and more accurate ways and more life-saving ways, but also to our economy as a state. So, Governor Ivey has continued to be supportive of the UAB Genomic Medicine Center. I think in light of COVID-19 and the discussion about how do we share in the capital costs of this center and bringing it to life, so to speak, in light of COVID-19 and its impact on state revenues, which we haven't been able to quantify yet, but we know it's not going to be positive. It's going to be a negative impact. And the fact that the state has seen some of its expenses rise in answer to COVID-19. I think that uncertainty in and of itself puts the Psca bond issue in the best light of being our best opportunity to see some shared funding and the best way to fund that gap in capital that is needed to bring the UAB Genomic Center to life. I think that I'm looking at the clock. I feel like all I've been doing is talking, so I know I have. So I think it's probably time for me to end here at this point and give you guys an opportunity to ask questions if you have any. So thank you for allowing me to be with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Secretary Canfield. Appreciate you being here and appreciate your comments. I'm going to hand it to Elizabeth Paul, who's going to be handling the questions. I think we're going to open the chat room for those who want to ask questions now. But Elizabeth, I'm going to rename you Virginia no matter what. Elizabeth, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thank you, Fred. So the chat function should be open now. So if you have a question, please just send in your questions via the chat. We'll start off with one question that we received ahead of time. Secretary Canfield, I think you answered a part of this, but then the second portion we might haven't covered yet. So what do you envision in the way of economic development legislation for a special session, especially as it relates to extending deadlines for incentives clawbacks?
So I think that's really two questions. If we address the issue of, if I understand the question correctly, one part of that question is, are we going to need legislation to address situations where we have entered into project agreements with companies and they have a stipulated timetable or milestone schedule that they have to meet in terms of capital investment and employment numbers in order to be able to qualify for their ability to be in receipt of those incentives. Otherwise, if COVID-19 has a negative impact on that timetable or on those milestones, I think the question is, does that require legislation to be able to address it? And the answer is no. We build into our project agreements a stipulation that allows some flexibility when there is an act of God that creates a situation outside of a company's control to meet its obligations. And so we will and expect to be making some modifications in recognition that some companies may have to see their timetables or milestones shift in time to the right a little bit, and we're prepared to do that. The second part of that question is probably related to what I discussed about the Alabama Jobs Act and the Growing Alabama credit, and that is that one, if we don't address the sunset, then those two tools will die. They will go away at the end of this fiscal year and calendar year. And that would be very unfortunate in terms of our ability to recover under the extreme circumstances that we've got with COVID-19. So we've got to see passage of a bill to move that sunset by, we prefer to do it 4 years. And we've also got to address the cap those limitations that are created by the caps, because we've hit the cap in the capital in the Growing Alabama credit once, and we expect with the broadening of that credit's ability to work with tech companies and med tech and things of that nature, as well as rural settings, it's going to create more demand for that credit. So we've got to see the cap raised there. The Alabama Jobs Act, we're just growing in terms of the number of companies that we've secured that are making new investment in the state, bringing new jobs to the state. We've had so much project activity as a result of all this. It's part of why we've been recognized as a state that has been so successful in that regard. We've got to raise the cap there, otherwise we're going to be frozen. We won't be able to offer those incentives anymore, and that would be just as bad as having it sunset and terminated. So that'll happen in a special session. It'll have to happen in a special session sometime in probably July or August.
Thank you, Secretary Canfield. Okay, a two-part question here as well. How well is Alabama positioned to capture expected migration of jobs from densely populated urban centers? And are there certain industries that we should target?
Well, there's a lot of speculation about what population changes that we're going to see in terms of population shifts. When you look at COVID-19 and you look at how quickly it spread and just the rate of spread in densely populated cities like New York City and others, there is a certain amount of belief that some people will decide that it's not worth it. It's better to move to a smaller market, smaller city, where you don't have to rely on public transit as much, or being in close confined quarters with people like as you are in some more densely populated areas. We actually are already, or prior to COVID-19, had launched a program because we were already taxed for being able to find qualified workers because our population hadn't grown enough, and we were at the highest level of employment that we've ever been, with the lowest level of unemployment that we'd ever seen. We had set up a marketing campaign that we were about to launch into targeted markets that would be attractive to people to consider shifting their career opportunities and coming to a place like Alabama and to markets like Birmingham and others. That has taken a pause during COVID-19, but I think we're going to revisit it and just kind of reformulate it. The types of industry that might move as a result of that, I think everybody's heard all of the stuff that Elon Musk has been talking about in California about relocating his manufacturing from California. I really don't think that's, I think that's more show than go. But he knows that Alabama would be interested if that were the case. But I think the other types of industries that we're going to see are going to be, we're going to really be focused on a lot of med tech and R&D opportunities, more knowledge-based jobs. And I think that those are the kinds of jobs that do tend to gravitate to high density communities. And so secondary markets like those that we offer in Alabama may become more ideal in terms of quality of life, cost of living, and safety.
Okay, great. All right, I think we probably have time for one last question. How much opportunity do you think COVID has created for Alabama to bring more manufacturing back from overseas in terms of medical devices, electronic devices, and pharmaceuticals?
Well, when we're talking to some pharmaceutical companies, I mentioned earlier the work that we've been doing through the Business and Manufacturers Alliance, trying to identify companies in Alabama that either want to expand into medical products or medical technology and medical equipment. Particularly when it comes to PPE, there's a reason why PPE is no longer the manufacturer based in the US. And that is because it went offshore because of the cost of labor. Because PPE, masks and surgical gowns and things like that tend to be low value items that don't have a high degree of value in terms of the value chain. And so price is very important when customers make decisions, like hospitals and others have to make decisions about purchasing and acquiring PPE. They've got budgets that they have to meet. And so manufacturing some of those items in an environment where the cost of labor tends to be high relative to some of the other parts of the world, we have to continue to work slowly and carefully with companies to make sure that they can sustain that production. And so I believe that we've identified a very small core group of companies in the state that are willing to make the investment, and we're going to see how that goes. So, but I think our biggest opportunities are med tech and R&D, high value, high margin products that can be manufactured, designed, researched, and developed here. I see Mayor Woodfin. Hello, Mayor.
Hello, Mayor.
I'm taking my mute off. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Greg, as always, thank you for what you do across the entire state and your support of Birmingham. And
Thank you.
speak to everybody. Hope everybody's doing okay during these times, and thank everybody for their leadership.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for making tough decisions sometimes. And, you know, we talked about how difficult those decisions are when you're trying to strike the balance between protecting the public safety and protecting the economy. And I don't think whenever you decided to run for mayor that this was part of the equation you thought you were going to have to deal with the pandemic virus. I know I didn't think I was going to be doing this, but my hat's off to all elected leaders like yourself who have to make those tough decisions.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Y'all take care.
You too.
All right, with that, I want to thank you, Greg, and everybody for thank you for being here with us, and Kelvin, thank you again for your leadership. You're up there on my screen at least, my man. Appreciate that, and hope everybody has a great day, and appreciate everybody being here with us. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Enjoyed it.
See ya.